This is Baxter Colburn, host of the Verse of the Day podcast. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
This is Dr. Mariah White, host of Your Life Matters, here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you are done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Your Life Matters, where we talk about dreaming big and dreaming bold to reach your wildest dreams in both your health and your happiness. A new show comes out every single Tuesday. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you'll never miss an episode of Your Life Matters. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Hey cake sniffers, welcome to Beauties and Headcanons, where we're nerdy and you probably are too. I'm Lindsay and I'm here today with Emily, and I speak about her all the time, and we've been, I know that in just about every episode I mentioned my daughter. So today our special guest is actually Aurelia, my daughter. Today's episode we wanted to talk about something that recently came out on Netflix as the season 3. And it's very near and dear to our hearts in a lot of ways. Some of us have grown up with this series as far as the book version. Some of us have seen the movie, and some of us have watched all of the Netflix episodes, sometimes in a binge-worthy fashion. So we wanted to talk a little bit about a series of unfortunate events today.
Yeah. And so the series of unfortunate events was originally written by the author's name is called Lemony Snicket, but his real name is Daniel Handler. So Daniel Handler uses the pen name Lemony Snicket to write all these books, 13 books in the series. And first of all, the world that he writes in the books is just really cool, because the way he writes it, Lemony Snicket is narrating it. And it's written in a way kind of for like a lower middle school kind of age range. So like, I don't know, I started reading them when I was like 10, which is when they first started coming out. And I know Aurelia is kind of around that age as well, as she's been reading them. So it kind of fits into that age range. I think my sister Sarah, who's guested on the podcast before, Sarah Poppy, she was kind of my fact checker consultant when I was kind of working on things here, and she started reading them right when they came out, and she was a couple years younger than me, so she was like 8 maybe or 9 when she started reading them.
Okay.
And so yeah, kind of around that age range is what they're originally written for. So if you try to read it as an adult, just keep that in mind. But if you have kids, or if you know kids that are looking for something to read, highly recommend them. My husband tried to read them in college, I think, and he just could not get into it. Partly because I think the way that Lemony Snicket writes it, or narrates the series, is just really interesting, and it's a little bit different because it explains things that adults might understand and get right off the bat, but younger readers kind of need to develop in their reading skills. So I really love this kind of as a an assistive reading of learning about literature, literary devices, vocabulary, character development, all that kind of stuff. It does a really good job of it in a way that doesn't make kids feel dumb when they read it.
There's a lot of, I wanted to say my little sister is 4 years younger than me, and I was too old at that point to be reading them. So I want to say I was probably 14 or 15.
Okay, sure.
My sister was definitely reading them, and I'd say she was about 10 or 11 at the time. And there's a lot of literary devices, as well as like breaking of the third wall when we get into talking about the television series.
Oh, love it. Yeah.
The fourth wall. But also a lot of intelligence speak, usage of bigger words and different devices. So you don't feel like you're reading something that's geared towards a much younger audience.
Right.
But you're also not feeling like things are going very over your head at that age range.
No, exactly. Which I think is like I love that Daniel Handler wrote it the way he did because it implies that the reader has intelligence, but it also explains things well enough that they didn't like have to ask for it.
Right. Is that how you felt about it, Aurelia?
Well, with it, with like the way that it's written, it did expand my vocabulary. I got to say that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So as far as the books go, starting off with the books, 'cause those came out first, back in probably late 90s, early 2000s. It follows the mishaps, misadventures, they call it the unfortunate events that happen of three orphaned heirs of a fortune after the untimely death of their parents. Everything's wrapped in mystery, chased by a vengeful criminal who wants to steal their fortune, and the whole thing is narrated by a guy named Lemony Snicket. And he's like, it's my burden to tell this tale of woe and misfortune and unfortunate events. And he's like, throughout the whole series, is like, just stop reading right now. You just should really stop reading this because it's just terrible. Everything that happens from here on out is the worst story you're ever going to read. He tries to like convince you to not read it.
Right.
Which makes you want to read it more.
Which doesn't work.
Exactly. It doesn't work.
Well, and they do that in the television series too, which is really cool. Like that you're repeatedly told, I'm sure you have something better you could be watching.
Right.
I'm sure there's something better you could be doing.
Well, and even the theme song of the show is "Look Away."
Yes.
Look away, look away. You shouldn't watch this because everything's terrible.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and it's
So Aurelia, no, I was just going to ask Aurelia, what when you were reading the books, what was something that really drew you into them?
Well, when I first started reading it, it was because a teacher suggested a basket that she had of types of books like that, and she suggested that I'd read some of them. So I started getting into the first book. And then something that really drew me in was growing my vocabulary. And another thing that really drew me in was the plot line.
Awesome. So what was it about the plot that kind of helped you continue wanting to read it?
I think it was because I wasn't doing so well in school. I mean, usually I get B's, but I think I got more than one C, which is above my average, I think. So sometimes when I'm like feeling really down on the blues, I kind of compare my life to the Baudelaire's, and I just feel a lot better. I know that sounds weird, but it's the truth.
It's kind of a good tactic. Is like, well, it could be worse.
It could be.
You know, it's like, okay, let's try and look at the bright side of things here.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that, taking the perspective of it's not everything is horrible, and you can figure things out.
right. And when you think about it, there's a lot of things that aren't great that happen to them, but in the end, even at the end of each book, they end up overcoming whatever the challenge is for each book.
Oh, exactly.
And then a new one comes.
Right. Unfortunately, that pesky Count Olaf, the main villain of the series, just somehow always keeps coming back.
Right.
Yup.
So anything else that we want to talk about with the books, as far as, because I've read up to like the fourth book, I think. This is cool. Every book title has an alliterative title. The first one is called The Bad Beginning, and then so on and so forth. They all have alliterations like The Miserable Mill, The Austere Academy, and so on, except for the last one, which is called The End. A fitting title for the last book of the series. Anything else you guys want to add?
Well, I did take a couple of notes.
Sure.
That I took today. I was looking at some of like the illustrations in the book compared to how they were in the TV series, because again, I have not seen the movie. And what I was I think Count Olaf was supposed to have whiter hair. he kind of has gray hair, but it was supposed to be white. And another thing in the second book, Dr. Montgomery looks nothing like he does in the books, because Dr. Montgomery was supposed to be... They did get, like, the chubbiness and the way he smiles and stuff like that. But the hair color was supposed to be orange, and, of course, it was black. But
Yeah.
But the cast choice on that was really good. I just think they could have done a little bit better with that.
And I noticed a couple of things like that too. And it's interesting the different choices that they made between the show and the books, because I think it's really important for a show to stay true to the characters and their personalities, and that's really hard to do when it's from a book, because I mean, you can get a physical description down and that's kind of easy to accomplish, but if it's a personality, that's harder to get to come across. And so I think it was really cool how they actually did that.
Yeah, I agree.
Our episodes are brought to you by Squadcast, and we're so excited to announce that they are now out of beta and fully released. With each of us living in a different time zone, Squadcast makes it easy for us to record and still make it sound like we're in the same room. Use our code, all caps Talk Nerdy, for 50% off your first month of Squadcast. Check out our affiliate link on our show's page at publichousemedia.org.
I know we're kind of transitioning from the book into the television series, but we should really definitely talk about some of the movie, because that movie came out in 2004.
Okay, yeah.
And we didn't get to see a whole lot of it. But I think that a lot of the casting choices in the television show were pretty amazing.
Yeah.
As far as the book, I feel like there's not a whole lot more. We've really talked about what we want to on it. I, of course, haven't read the book, so I can't say very much. But Emily, what do you have to say about the movie?
All right. So yeah, out of the three of us, I'm the one that has seen the movie. Elizabeth, unfortunately, couldn't record with us today, but she has seen the movie and hasn't seen anything else or read the books that I know of.
Ooh.
So she said she rather enjoyed the movie, having not read the books or seen the Netflix series. And I watched the movie after reading the first few books. And the movie itself covers books 1 through 3. And it has Jim Carrey playing Count Olaf, which I was excited about because I actually enjoy him as an actor. He's a very, quirky kind of guy, and Count Olaf is a very quirky kind of character. So I thought that would fit really, really, really well. And for that movie, it did. With a couple appearances by some other names. Meryl Streep shows up in there, and there's a couple other people. I'm not remembering who at the moment. But all of the plots of those 3 books that they cover kind of follow the book order for the most part. And there's a few other things that are kind of misrepresented or distorted a little bit to kind of make the movie flow the way they wanted it to. But the weirdest part to me of the movie was that it took some of the first book and kept it at the beginning, and then wrapped up the whole movie with the end of the first book.
Oh.
Yeah. So it's really strange the way that they made part of the first book happen, and then they so you know how the first book they go through and they're living with Count Olaf, and then they get out of his clutches and things. Well, they leave him before all of the Count Olaf plot actually happens. And I'm like, what? They didn't even do that. What? How? I don't want to give away those spoilers. You can find those out yourself. But I totally thought that something, I was like, did I miss something in this movie here? Did I fall asleep and miss what happened? No, saved it for later. And they moved on to the next book, which was The Reptile Room with Dr. Montgomery and stuff. I loved him. I was super, when I read the books, when I watched the movie, when I saw the series, I'm like, he's great. They're going to live with him forever. It's going to be perfect and everything will be happy, la-di-da, the end. No, of course not.
Right.
It's a series of unfortunate events. They're not going to stay with him. He was probably one of my favorite Guardians early on. And afterward, I don't remember any of the other Guardians in particular. If I would read the books, I would probably have more that I like. But
right.
Montgomery was probably my favorite so far. But so they did the reptile room, they did the wide window, and those plots were pretty accurate to the book from what I remember. But then after the wide window, they went back to the bad beginning plot line and ended with Count Olaf recapturing them again and whatever.
Okay.
It was really strange. Yeah, I forget how they even got everything to wrap back up with the end of book 1 again, because they were in a different place and it was just really odd. So
Did the movie have all the henchmen?
yes, it did have all the henchmen.
Okay.
Henchmen and women, and the one that's can't tell if it's a man or a woman,
Ambiguous,
and
sure.
the twin old women. Yeah, I think it had all of them. They were a lot different than the Netflix series, but they were all there.
Okay.
Actually, well, I think in the movie, the one that was the ambiguous person was actually like one side was dressed and looked like a man, the other side, like left and right, the other side dressed and looked like a woman. So it was really odd.
You said something interesting too about the different guardians that show up. They obviously in the television show are much more of them because they go through all 13 books, but they're always someone you really want them to end up with, even when it comes down to Judge Strauss and how eccentric and naive she was. I still was ready for them to end up with her than anyone else. And of course, halfway through the show, you start realizing, okay, obviously it's too good to be true. If it's too good to be true, it's obviously going to be, especially with this, where we know it's all unfortunate events. But I loved everybody, even Esme Squalor. I liked her before we found out she was acting and in cahoots with Count Olaf. I liked her because she was so eccentric, and every guardian was a little bit nuts, but still
they have mm-hmm.
And with the guardians, I just want to know, which one was your favorite?
Well, from what I can remember, I think Monty Montgomery was my favorite because he was super cool, and at the time when I was reading it, I was super into sciencey stuff, and so him being a reptile scientist, I was like all about it, super excited, and like I just thought it was super cool that he had an entire room filled with all these different creatures.
Yeah, and the extremely deadly viper, like that was.
Oh yeah, I loved that. It was really time. Like
even in the television series they keep talking, or the Netflix series they keep talking about how no, it's a misnomer. No, he's not extremely
right.
deadly.
Well, what's a misnomer? It's not actually extremely deadly.
Right. I think my favorite guardian was probably I liked Esme Squalor's husband the best, I think.
Oh, yes, he was great. Jerome.
Yeah, he made me really excited. Like I wanted him to.
He's very genuine.
Yeah, and spoiler alert, we get to see him again at the end of season 3. In the very last couple of episodes, and he's still, definitely Jerome Squalor, and he sort of gets a backbone too. He ends up standing up to Esme a little bit.
Good.
We start to actually see what happened with Lemony and Beatrice, and it's a really cool end to the series. I still have a lot of questions, so I feel like maybe I should read the books just to see if those questions are answered or not.
I have all of them.
But I also feel like the television series did such a good job of making it something that was visually appealing, as well as moving along well enough with the plot line. And I do feel, I remember a little bit about the movie, or I read some about the movie and how people had talked about how it seemed a little bit rushed. Did you feel that way?
The movie?
Yeah.
Oh, it's a movie trying to cover 3 books. Yes, it felt very rushed. And like they skipped sections of the different books. They kept stuff mostly in order, but like they skipped sections of the books that would have kind of matured the plot line and stuff, like would have added character development. It would have made things more engaging to the watcher, to the viewer, I mean, it was a movie trying to cover 3 books.
Right. Well, and with the Netflix series, we did get one episode for each half of a book. So
Right, exactly. So that was a great decision, I think. It was 3 seasons. There were what, like 7 or 8 episodes per season. So
something
each
like that.
book
They
had
varied,
2 episodes.
actually. The very last one was a different number than the second season, than different than the first season. So it
Yeah, so
ended
I
up with
know for sure.
25 episodes, I think.
Okay, I looked it up specifically. I know that the third season had 7 episodes because I wanted to see
Oh,
how many episodes the last book had. And actually, the last book was just 1 episode.
And it's the fattest.
And
it's
it's
the
the
biggest book.
fattest book of all
It's
the
the
books, but
biggest
yet they
book.
figured out how to make it into 1 episode, which to me, having not seen that last episode and not having read the book, kind of makes me wonder if they specifically left out certain parts of the 13th book so that you kind of had to read it to find out what the answers were to your questions.
Right. Well, and I think
I
maybe
don't know.
there might even be a chance then that we could all read them and do a book club kind of thing, because none of us have read that last one. I have seen the last episode, and so has Aurelia. I didn't feel like there was a whole lot missing. Other than those missing VFD holes and things that I feel like the whole series sort of alluded to, but didn't really answer those questions. I did feel like it was still a good end to the series. It was still a good
Okay.
end to that season and to the whole show. So
Yeah.
it definitely felt conclusive, but also left enough questions that I still like, I could watch this again, and I could read the book, and
Sure.
I could probably have all kinds of ideas as to what I was doing.
Yeah. Well, and I learned from talking with my sister, after she loved the Netflix series, highly recommended it to me, which is why I even started watching it. And she, let me know ahead of time because she knew I hadn't finished all of the books yet, that the series includes a lot of extra commentary and details about the Secret Society VFD that is not part of the books at all.
Okay.
So it's
that
like
makes
kind
sense
of
then.
Does.
added tidbits, and I don't know if the VFD stuff would be wrapped up with the books then either, just because they add some, which is really, really cool, because actually Daniel Handler was a heavy consultant with making the Netflix series.
Right. Well, and that would make sense too then, that those questions would be left unanswered, because if they were extra, then they wouldn't be part of the main plot line.
Exactly. Yeah, but I did love how they kind of wrapped in the little, like people on the outside of the Baudelaires storyline from the VFD trying to get like the Baudelaires figured out. Which, the books are straight up like Lemony Snicket following the Baudelaires, and that's it.
Right. Yeah, and so the series does have a lot more to say, and it kind of talks more about the other stuff that could be happening while all of that was going on as well. So I know we have a lot to talk about with the television, with the Netflix series. What did we love the most about it?
Personally, I loved that they used Patrick Warburton as Lemony Snicket. Just the casting in general was fantastic, but I think him specifically as Lemony Snicket was perfect.
Yes.
And then probably next on my list is Neil Patrick Harris as Count Olaf.
Well, and it's funny that you say that, because I did read Daniel Handler and one of the guys that was very instrumental in the casting, Patrick Warburton and Neil Patrick Harris, were their top picks.
Oh, that's
absolutely
perfect.
Who they chose. The gentleman who was in charge of the casting, he actually went to Neil Patrick Harris and had seen him in passing. They were out to dinner, and he said, "I have a role for you. I'm not 100% sure that I have the job yet, but just, I'm letting you know this is in the works." And he didn't even know if Netflix was going to pick it up yet. He didn't even know
man.
yet. But then obviously when he did, he went straight to him and said, "You remember how I told you that this is
Awesome.
is yours? Well, it still is. Let's go."
That's awesome. I love
and
it.
That was really
That's
cool.
awesome.
And Patrick Warburton as well. I think he was Daniel Handler's first choice to play Lemony Snicket, and that was some of the coolest stuff that I've ever heard.
That's perfect. Yep. Yeah, and it's just the way that Patrick Warburton narrates everything. It's in almost a dry humor kind of way, but also a very serious tone.
Yeah.
So like you can tell he's not actually trying to be funny with the way he says his narrations, but it does come off funny just because of the context.
Right.
Another thing that I thought was great with the casting was that if you're like me, then you watched a lot of like fantasy and realistic fiction, but mostly fantasy. One of my favorite movies is Ella Enchanted, and
That's a good one. Mm-hmm.
and with that, Lucy Punch, who plays Esme, I did not even recognize that it was that until I was thinking one day and watching her with my mom. I'm like, who is she? And then I found out it was Lucy Punch, and I'm like, where do I know her from? So I looked it up, and I found out it was one of the stepsisters in Ella Enchanted.
That's awesome. I love it when we find like crossover actors and actresses like that, and you can't remember where they're from, but you know them, and you like them in a different thing.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that too. There's even I was watching The Miserable Mill, and the guy who plays one of the associates, he was in Flight of the Conchords. He's one of my favorite people in that show, and I got maybe 20 minutes into the first episode, and I was like, I know him from. And we've talked about how I'm an IMDb junkie, so of course I looked him up right away. And I can honestly say, as far as not only with him, but almost all of the other casting calls in this show, I was so excited about and just thrilled. I can't think of any performance that wasn't right or that didn't feel correct. In the very last couple of episodes, there's a gentleman who plays 3 triplets. He plays 3 of the same person, and it is all the same actor who plays.
That's great.
And it was so much fun. I not only thought it was 3 different people, but the seamlessness and the flawlessness of how he was able to portray all 3 of them, with even just little nuances, little differences between each of their personalities, because one of them was supposed to be bad, one of them was supposed to be good, and one of them was supposed to be perfect. And
that's awesome.
The Denumas, Dewey, and the other 2.
I think they're called.
Is it the Dunhams?
I think it's called the Dunhams.
Well, anyway, the 3 twins at the very last couple of episodes or 3 triplets. Oh my goodness! And that comes up several times in the series too, because we also have the Quagmires, and they talk about the 3 orphans, and then the triplets.
Wait, I was thinking about the Quagmires.
The Quagmires that are also referred to as twins when they aren't twins; they're triplets.
But one of them is no longer
missing, but they think he's perished. So it's really cool.
What do you mean by the Duncums?
So then let's also talk about some things that we really loved about what they did with the Netflix series. I do know that they were very specific about how they wanted to film it. They didn't want it to be very Hollywood stylized. They wanted it to be more of a stage feel. So
yeah,
it do
to
feel
me,
a lot of the time that Neil Patrick Harris is on a stage, and that they're in real time, that they're really in these places doing a show. And I absolutely loved that. There's not a whole lot of CGI. There's not a whole lot of pretend or glorious things that they could have done, where we've seen the elaborate backdrops and the beautiful scenery and stuff, and there's not a whole lot of that in this show.
No, I loved that. And to me it felt like they were in like the 50s or so, somewheres around there, like the late 40s, early 50s, something like that. All of the vehicles they're driving around are definitely much older. I was watching an episode with my 4-year-old, and she's like, wow, those cars are pretty, and I'm like, yeah, they are.
Yeah, I think there's sort of like a timelessness to it. Obviously we know that it's not necessarily set in our time or any other previous time, especially because of the hints you get from the costuming. But at the same time, it could be, it's very timeless the way that it's portrayed.
It's definitely its own secluded world.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
It's separate from everything else.
Everything that we're familiar with. To in the very last couple of episodes, there's an island that they're on. Everything that they're wearing is very flowy. It's not necessarily based off of a culture or a time, but more the feel of what they're going for that group of people. When you go to Lucky Smells, it's also factory workers. You don't get the impression that it's necessarily stuck in time, but more that it's stuck in a space, stuck in a certain kind of whatever's happening at that period of time.
Well, and actually, I was just scrolling through IMDb real quick here and noticed a bunch of other great casting tags in here. I mean, Nathan Fillion shows up. We've also got Kobe Smulders popping in here. Just a few names that we would recognize. Probably, who else? Joan Cusack was Justice Strauss. I'm like, I've seen her in like a bajillion other things, but she's never like a leading lady, but she's always there.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe she has been a leading lady. But yeah. So she's in there. But then also Daniel Handler pops into an episode. He was a fish head salesperson in 3 episodes.
Oh.
So the author actually was in a few episodes himself. I'm like, that's cool. I love it when they do that with like little Easter eggs.
Right. That's a very Stephen King-y kind of thing to do.
Mm-hmm, for sure. But yeah, no, I loved how just everything that they created something in the Netflix series that was just so like in its own little bubble.
Right. So let's talk a little bit more about the literary things that they do in the show, as well as the singing. That intro song is definitely Neil Patrick Harris singing.
Oh yes, definitely is, for sure.
There's also some hints of, I think, Violet Baudelaire. I don't know who plays her, but Violet Baudelaire singing, and I think there's some of Klaus, but yep. I'm not
At the end of each season, there's a final song where they sing about how that's not how the story goes, right?
Oh, I don't remember the ending song,
yeah,
but you're probably
Aurelia
right.
Was singing it. It's that's not how the story goes. Is how they talk about how you would think that this would be a better
scenario, but it's not. That's not how the story goes.
Right.
Oh yeah. Okay. Gotcha. I love the musicality to it though too, like the way the like the music flows and the I forget there's a musical term for the cadence of it.
Yes.
How the chords progress and everything like that. Chord progression and cadence. Because it's just so like it fits really well.
Well, they do a lot with the words too. We talked about how it had enhanced Aurelia's vocabulary reading the books, but there's a lot where Klaus and Violet are being told by Mr. Poe or by Count Olaf what a word means, whether that's actually what the word means or not. And
right.
They're constantly like, we know what that word means.
You don't have
right, to exactly. And it's not what you just told us. So.
Right, and exactly. There's a few times where Klaus is like, "That's not what that word means."
Right. Klaus the bookworm.
Right.
Who basically has. He basically has like every prominent author memorized.
Exactly. And that's what's really cool in the very last few episodes. They actually are in a hotel that is set up like a card catalog. So they play off of the numbers in the Dewey Decimal System, and they talk about how this number pertains to this part of the Dewey Decimal System and this part of where it would be in a library. So it's really cool because they, these are things that someone who is younger might not remember or might not know about, but at the same time, it really plays off of what an older generation would know. I did hear that some of the criticisms of this series was that people were upset that the children weren't very relatable, weren't very very much like themselves or very much like young children. And I think that's kind of the point with the Baudelaires, is that they are exceptional, that they are different, that they are, Violet ties up her hair when she's getting ready to invent something or solve a problem. And
Yeah.
Klaus just has to read about it so that he can know how to do it and look into it. And he never does anything without reading a manual. These are exceptional children, so they wouldn't be someone you
Absolutely.
could necessarily relate to unless you were also exceptional. So it kind of makes you look for what's exceptional within yourself in order to relate to these kids.
Well, and another thing, which is just, it adds to the humor of the show and the books as well, is how clueless most of the adults are. Even the ones that are trying to help the kids out, like the Poes. They're just so oblivious to what's actually going on with Count Olaf and everything. And they're just like, oh, you're just children. You wouldn't understand.
And they're like, no, we understand way more than you.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Because like you said, they're exceptional. They're very intelligent children. Even Sunny, who's a baby, she actually understands things and
Right.
responds intelligently.
Well, yeah, and there's a part where in Austere Academy, she's a receptionist, and
yeah.
she grows throughout the series too. We know that she ages, but there's a part in the very last season where she makes a decision to do something amazing as well. She sort of sacrifices herself, or puts herself in a position where she could sacrifice herself, just like Klaus and Violet have been doing the whole series. But
she is too, so it's a little bit.
Yeah,
it's a little bit outside of her normal, like what a 2-year-old would have developed.
Yeah, and Klaus and Violet are so used to having to save her, or having to go, make decisions to take care of her, and she, at this point in the series, makes a decision for them, and it's a turning point. Really, she's part of the, she's more of a primary actor as opposed to the teeth in the group.
Although the teeth are very useful, I will say.
In the book as the teeth, but I don't know about the ending, if they changed that, because again, I have not read through the whole series.
Right. Well, they must. Right. They must develop her, because they
did it in a TV show.
Right.
The TV show is not far off from the books.
Right.
No, exactly. The design is the only thing that's sketchy.
My sister Sarah, I was asking her, like, well, should I watch the rest of the series, or should I try and read the books first and then watch it? She's like, honestly, you'd probably be fine either way, because they're so true to the books. Right. And she does not say that about anything. She doesn't even say that about Harry Potter, because we all know that there's certain things that do not quite follow the books with Harry Potter. She was on an episode about the character differences between the characters in the books versus the characters in the movies from Harry Potter. So she knows her differences, and if she were to say that it would be fine either way to finish the series or finish the books, I'm going to trust her on that. She's very particular.
A lot of times, you'll find someone who always has that just idea. They either are all about the television series, all about the movie, or all about the books. You don't normally find someone who says that they are very similar, or that you can pick one or the other. It's usually someone's a purist or a visualist.
Exactly.
You can't really find it where they're done well enough that they could both be on the same track.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I think this is just kind of showing that the Netflix series is really, really well done. And I think they did a lot of things right, as far as, including Daniel Handler with as much as they did, especially because they added a lot about the VFD. They wouldn't have been able to do that accurately without him.
Right.
So I think they just did a fantastic job with it, and I'm really excited to watch the rest.
I think it's really cool about this too, is that there's so much potential for it to be misconstrued as something that you wouldn't want to watch, or that isn't for the mainstream. But at the same time, it's different, and it's visually appealing, but also intellectually appealing, and
Yes.
something that was fun to watch in a short period of time, to binge as we all do for the Netflix stuff that comes out when we're waiting for it. But also based so closely off of a beloved book series as well.
Exactly. Yeah, one that a lot of people grew up reading, kind of similarly to growing up reading the Harry Potter books. A lot of people grew up reading the Series of Unfortunate Events books.
Yeah. All right, ladies, so final thoughts?
I think that either way, you should be good with knowing the plot line.
We'll disregard the movie.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, I read a lot of reviews about the movie, honestly, that said that they thought it was the best ever, Jim Carrey's greatest performance, blah, 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 all these things. But at the same time, they had read the books or hadn't read the books, and they didn't have the television series yet. They didn't have the Netflix series to base things off of. So, in that period of time, we've really advanced what we're able to do. And with some patience, you can always get something that's just phenomenal.
Well, thanks for getting nerdy with us today. And thank you so much, Aurelia, for joining us. We really appreciate that you took the time to, well, not only read the books that you've read and watch the show, but like think about it. And, it was really fun to talk to you and kind of get your perspective too. If you listeners know someone else who would love this episode, make sure to share this with them. I know that there's a lot of people who love this series but might not actually listen to the show. So go ahead and share. Send them to our show on whatever podcast platform they like, or you can send them to the website publichousemedia.org and let us know what they think. They can tell us that on our Facebook page, on our Instagram. You guys know where to tell them to go. Anyways, I'm Emily.
I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Aurelia, and thanks for getting nerdy with us today on Beauties and Hand Cannons.